Good morning. Let's start with a quiz. How many of you know why it is we sang the last song? The song we just finished singing, why did we sing it?
It's at the period of the Reformation.
Period of the Reformation, good. Who wrote it? Who wrote the text?
Man of Simon.
Menno Simons. And what does Menno Simons lead to eventually? Mennonites, right. So this is, I think, like one of two hymns in the hymnal from Menno Simons, who didn't write a lot. We could have been singing Luther songs all day if we'd have wanted to. But anyway, so that was why we sang that hymn. Some of you might also be wondering why it is that Rachel did our little Reformation history rather than me. And the answer is because history is probably the weakest part of my education. And so a little story. So a couple of years ago in Ghana, I was up in the northern part of Ghana visiting the Mennonite churches there. And the Mennonite churches in Ghana know even less about Mennonite history than most of the Mennonites in North America. In fact, way less. And so they asked me to do a little presentation on Mennonite history. And I was up there and I had no notes, and just like what I remembered from my Mennonite history classes 30 years ago. And God was so distressed by this idea that God sent this huge rainstorm, which made it impossible for me to get to church. So this is sort of God's opinion of my knowledge of history. So what do? We go back to what I know. The book is what I know, history not so much. So what I want to think about today is just this ongoing need for reformation, that Rachel did a really good job of starting us off saying, look, it wasn't like, 1517 came along and like for the very first time there was this reformation, and it affected the whole world and everything from then on. And the reality is that reformation is this ongoing process that never ever stops. And actually that part of the Reformation affected one small part of Europe, but never touched like Africa or Asia or North America or other major parts of the world that, eventually it sort of got there, but not really. So we want to start this morning in 1 Kings. So we read this little passage in 1 Kings, and that's what the signs and stuff are doing. Right? So for those of you who don't remember this or haven't been here before, right, we do this little map of Israel in the building, and it works really well. So I want you to imagine that this blue line is the Jordan River. Okay, so the north is this way, even though it's not actually. Right? And up here is the Sea of Galilee, and down at the south end there is the Dead Sea, not to scale. The reason this works really, really well in this sanctuary is because we have our Jordan River Valley, and then we have the hills over here and the pews, and then the Mediterranean Sea is sort of over there. Okay, so it actually is remarkably helpful that way, right? But during the time of David, all of this was Israel. So David, the great king, and he reigned over all of this territory. You guys over here, you're in the modern country of Jordan, right? So David tried to push over into there, never had much luck, right? Solomon came along, his son, expanded the territory a little bit here, there, and the next thing, built the great temple, right? Sort of, and this is often thought of as the high point of the kingdom of Israel, right? So that God is being worshipped and the people are all rich and happy and fat, and right, and that whole sort of story is at least in theory the way it was. The story we read, however, is from exactly roughly 20 years after Solomon. So 20 years after after Solomon and his great kingdom, the first thing that happened is the moment Solomon died, the nation of Israel here split in half. And it split in half about here, so that we have a fairly big northern half and a fairly small southern half. And it's even smaller when you realize that sort of anything past here is desert. Right? So this is the southern kingdom of Judah, right? Somewhere here is Jerusalem, right? You guys got Jerusalem here, right? Bethlehem is right behind Terence here, right? Little southern kingdom of Judah, big northern kingdom of Israel. Okay? Jordan River Valley, them guys over there, right? Great unwashed over there. Okay, with me so far? So then, King Asa comes along, and he's a good king, right? And Israel seems to be going bad king, good king, bad king, good king, bad king, good king. So this is good king time, apparently, right? And he reigns in Judah, and he heads things in the right direction, right back there. He's got his temple in Jerusalem and his kingdom in Jerusalem. So what's one of the good things he does? It says that he got rid of, he put away the male temple prostitutes. Did you notice that when we read it? Male temple prostitutes. Some of you might be even too young to hear those words. But there they are, right? Not something you think about when you think about like church fundraising ideas. Right? Like, why are there male temple prostitutes in Jerusalem? Right? How bad would things have to get here at Morgantown Church of the Brethren before we can Israel? Right? How much need is there for reformation at that point? That takes a lot of things going bad in an awful hurry in 20 years to go from city of the great king, right? City of Jerusalem, great temple to God, suddenly in 20 years. Wow, that's moving downhill in an awful hurry. So he does this, he does this, and it's probably a good thing, right? But wow, that's a lot, right? I mean, so already 20 years after Solomon, there's this huge need for a reformation, which he, according to the text, sort of does halfway. He does that, but he doesn't get rid of, right? So there's all this God worship going on in Jerusalem, but there's places already all over Israel where they're worshiping other gods. Right? So yeah, you can go to Jerusalem and worship Solomon's God, or you can go to the hill 5 miles away and worship somebody else's God, right? Because there's lots of them out there, right? And it's Tuesday, so we go there rather than Saturday when we go to Jerusalem. I don't know. The other thing that's happening is that at the same time, this group of God's chosen people over here is at war with this group of God's chosen people over here. Right? So what Rachel talked about with the Eastern Church and the Western Church, old story already. Right? Back then, Israel spent most of its energy trying to go to war against Judah, who spent most of its energy trying to defend itself from Israel. And so if we continued on reading, these guys over here are going to send to the Arameans who are over there and say, help us fight Israel. And in order to do that, they take all of the gold in the temple and they sort of give it to them. They help them in the war. Not that there's much left, because they've already had to give it to the Egyptians who've come and sacked Jerusalem in the meantime. Right? So this ongoing need for reformation. And we read about this also in the Psalm. The Psalm starts out in the past tense. Right? When the Lord restored the fortunes of Zion. Right? And the word restored obviously means that things were bad. Things were really, really bad. We don't know exactly, what problem the psalmist is writing about, but he says, when the Lord restored, right, at some point, things were really, really bad, but God restored the fortunes of Zion, right? Zion here meaning Jerusalem. And we were all happy. But then in verse 4, we get a switch of verb tense. Restore, O God, which means things are really, really bad again, right? We need another one of those. Right? So back at some point in the future, in the past, there was this bad time. God brought us back up, and then now we're back down again. Right? So again, up and down, all in the midst of one little song. What's interesting about this song, though, is how it thinks about the down times. Right? So sometimes things were so down in Jerusalem that the people fled, people ran away, or people got captured. And in these times, verse 6 in Psalm 126 says, well, what it says is, those who go out weeping, right, the people who are running away and leaving Jerusalem, bearing seeds for sowing. Right? So it's not like people are running away and this is a horrible, horrible time. But this psalmist wants you to think, right, we're fleeing and this is a time of sowing. This is a good thing in some strange way. That something positive is going to come out of whatever horrible thing is happening so that we're running away from Jerusalem. And there are certainly, in the history of Jerusalem or the history of the world, many, many times that people are fleeing for all kinds of reasons. And we live in a world full of refugees. And this psalmist wants to say, but there's some sort of sowing that's happening here too. So even these horrible situations, the psalm wants to put this sort of positive spin on these events. So then we move to Jesus. And I think it's very helpful sometimes to think about Jesus as another in a long line of Jewish reformers. That Jesus was a Jewish rabbi sent by the Jewish God to the Jewish people to try to help them figure out how to be better people of God. Now there were other groups in Jesus' day who were trying to do the same thing. And one of these groups was called the Pharisees. And that's basically, as best we understand, what the Pharisees were, is they were a Jewish reform movement. They were trying to take the Jewish people and say, hey, look, we're not doing a very good job. And we know we're not doing a very good job because, how do we know this? Because we're part of the Roman Empire. And if God's people have been captured by the Roman Empire, obviously we must be doing something wrong. And therefore we should do things better. And what we need to do better, the Pharisees said, is purity. Right? So we need to become the pure and clean people of God and separate ourselves from the unclean. Separate ourselves from those who don't follow the law. We have to keep following that law, right? Making sure we got all of our, all of it lined up in the way it's supposed to be. We're going to follow it. We're going to become the pure people of God, and then things are going to go better. And Jesus' version of Reformation was sort of the opposite of that. Jesus said, look, this is what the Pharisees are doing. Right? They're standing there in the temple going, oh, God, I'm so glad I'm not like them sinners over there. Right? Them sinners over there, they're doing this and they're doing that, but oh, God, I have separated myself from them and I'm different and I'm better. Hallelujah. Jesus said, no. God actually listens to the other guys. God's not interested in the Pharisees. He's interested in the people who are actually humbling themselves and saying, oh God, I've screwed up and it's really, really horrible and I'm really sorry. And Jesus says, those people are the one who go back forgiven rather than the separatists, rather than the Pharisees. So Jesus is saying, look, this whole idea of becoming better at being God's people is a really good idea, but you don't do it by separation. You do it by identification. You do it by identifying with the people who are poor, with the people who are humble, with the people who are in trouble, with the people who are struggling. Right? When you identify with them, that's when you become the people of God, rather than by stepping back and being holier than everybody else. So we sang this song, probably the classic Reformation song. Built on the rock, the church doth stand, even when steeples are falling. This song was written quite a ways after the Reformation, and I don't exactly know, tried to even find this out, but Google wasn't helpful. Right? Exactly what sort of steeples were falling when the writer wrote this. Today, of course, steeples aren't falling because of war, for the most part. They're falling because churches can't afford to keep up these big old buildings that they built a few hundred years ago, and they're falling from disrepair and neglect. Right? The big old churches in the cities in North America and in Europe, You know, the way they're surviving, the way they're not falling, is by becoming museums, by becoming tourist attractions. So you pay, people put money in the offering to come and see this fancy building, and that's what keeps your building up. Otherwise, right, it's going to fall. Because the 20 people that worship there on Sunday morning can't raise enough money otherwise to keep these big old buildings up. And the church is struggling because of legacy costs. Because it's got these big old buildings and these big old institutions, and there aren't enough people to keep them going. Because the church in North America and the church in Europe is shrinking. And it doesn't really matter what church you're part of. Basically, they're all shrinking. Catholics are shrinking, and the Lutherans are shrinking, and the Brethren are shrinking, and the Mennonites are shrinking, and the Southern Baptists are shrinking, and the Northern Baptists are shrinking, and if there were Eastern and Western Baptists, they'd be shrinking too. Right? And there's a few groups that sort of fudge their numbers so that they're not shrinking, or they're very proud of the fact that they're shrinking slower than the other churches. Right? But that's pretty much the case across the church. Right? And that's just the reality of things. And so then the question is, so what do we do? Right? And the steeples aren't falling yet, but the buildings are empty and cold more often than we wish they were. It's also really helpful, just like in the Reformation, to remember that this is a fairly regional kind of problem. It's a big region, right? North America, Europe, big region. The church in Africa, steeples aren't falling. They're being put up left, right, and center. I was at one crumbling church in Ghana, but it was crumbling because it was built out of mud brick, and a mud brick building only stands for 10 or 15 years, and then the assumption is, well, then you have to rebuild it again. So they were sort of looking forward to using cement the next time so that it wouldn't fall quite so quickly. But the idea was that, of course, we're going to rebuild it again because, you know, church is just building constantly in Africa. So it's very much a regional kind of problem. It's not like, oh, no, the whole world is like we are. We have our own problems, and the church in Africa has lots and lots and lots of problems, but they have these have different ones. So we're human beings, and we build buildings because it's better than trying to worship outside. We've done that. It gets old after a while. And we build institutions because we need to be organized. And some people really like institutions. But we live in a time when the church is in decline. And I don't know. So what we want to do these next few weeks, until we get tired of it, in adult Sunday school, is to talk about this. And the Mennonite Church this last summer did something called the Future Church Summit, in which we gathered around tables and gathered in groups. We sort of tried to discern together the future of the church. And to figure out, so who do we want to be, and what do we want to do, what's important to hang on to, and all these sorts of questions. And then it compiled these in a complicated sort of process that I can talk about more later. What we want to do is we want to look at the results of the Future Church Summit and say, okay, that's like the broader, you know, one small slice of the Mennonite Church in North America. What about us? What about us here at Morgantown Church of the Brethren? Which part of that resonates with us so that we don't have to start from nothing? But neither do we have to take somebody else's package and drop it into here, right? And now we're going to do that, right? Because the Mennonite Church has tried that in the past, right? If 15 years ago it said missional, we're all going to become missional. People are going like, that's not even an English word, right? Because it isn't, right? And that worked exactly that well. Some people tried it, and yeah, but people are going, let's do this in English. So we want to spend some time at that, because in as much as, right, 500 years ago, Luther tacked his 95 Theses on the wall, or on the door, sorry, of the church. We need to make some of our own, hopefully not 95. But we need to do that together. So I look forward to that time, to Sunday school today.